Hello, folks. Thank you for joining us. This is episode 3. This is the start of quite possibly the biggest topic that Talk ADHD is going to cover, I think. So this is talking about all things to do with being a woman, to do with being a girl, to having hormones and how they affect everything combining with our ADHD. And I know, and I've said this in the introduction, there's no way we can do this justice in one episode, but I hope this sparks the conversation. So everyone listening and watching, you'll hear a couple of different voices today, apart from myself and Andrew. So first of all, we're joined by Sara. So Sara is Andrew's wife and in her own right is phenomenally experienced in this field. She is a, a senior nurse specialist in ADHD, mental health nurse specializing in ADHD,
That's the one.
and has her own unique take on talking with clinicians and specialists and trying to find out what's what, as well as living with ADHD. And then we're joined by Elaine Travers, who's navigated, like a lot of people have, from a journey in the corporate world to noticing struggles, to career, wondering what's going on and navigating everything from the menopause and perimenopause, and then only this year to getting that diagnosis of ADHD that so many ladies are getting so late in life, and that adding another layer of, oh, that's why, to the conversation. So what I really hope from this discussion is that we're able to, A, show all of the ladies that hopefully are listening and watching out there and that see this, that we're behind them, to give them a sense that you particularly understand, and that for our part, Andrew, I think you probably agree with me, that we're on their side and we just want the best information possible out there. People can, like we've said before, have better conversations with the people they need to have conversations with, be they doctors or specialists or husbands or partners or work. So all that said, we're going to go back to slightly the episode 1 format here. And Andrew, I'm going to come to you first. It would seem to make sense for the non-scientifically minded or medically minded amongst us, and by that I mean me, to cover some of the basics, some of the science behind what are we talking about, why, what's going on, and then to use that as a point to open up a bit. So if that works for you, over to you.
Okay, I'll do my best. I shall do my best, but I'm not an expert. I don't have lived experience of this. So what I'd like to do is just give you the foundations of the endocrinology, but don't be frightened by that. It's a big word, but don't be. It's just the understanding of the changes in hormones in the body, and how that relates to ADHD and particularly dopamine. So I don't want to say a lot at this stage. I think it's more for the ladies to say, because graphs on a screen will only tell us so much, and actually living that and feeling those changes, it is what we're about, really. There's only so much the science can tell us, and actually, it's only in recent years, Matt, that we've picked up on this idea of changes in impact of medication through the menstrual cycle, and growing around that. So there's a lot more literature coming out now than there used to be. I think there was a little bit of sexism in clinical practice because adult ADHD was such a new field. There were so many different elements for the scientists to be looking at that we missed this. But that over recent years has improved, and some prescribers are varying treatment across the month, and hopefully we'll be able to talk about that later. But I think it's useful to explain why. Why would we do that? Connected, you would think. However, the hormone system, the endocrine system, is a delicate balance that is maintained in every human body, and it's different in male and female bodies, but it's a very delicate balance. So it relates to stress. It relates to, because a lot of the neurotransmitters, when they're not in the brain, are treated as hormones outside of the brain. We've talked about that in relation to noradrenaline in the past. So the first thing to say is this relationship between dopamine and estrogen. So estrogen is one of the hormones room, is one of the hormones that changes through the menstrual cycle. And varying levels of estrogen does have an impact on secretion of dopamine. So the higher the level of estrogen in the body, the more likely you are to produce dopamine. Okay? Estrogen levels change across the cycle. So you see this on the screen now. So we count day 1 as the beginning of menstruation. And the line that we're most interested in is the green one. Tricky to pick out on this graphic. But if you look in the middle there, on above day 14, we've got the red one has this big spike, and that's the luteinizing hormone, which stimulates ovulation. But the next highest peak is the green one, and that is the levels of estrogen across the month. So at close to ovulation is where estrogen levels are at their highest, and therefore, because estrogen levels are high, you're more likely to synthesize dopamine, so have that available. And as ovulation occurs, that estrogen level drops. And we see a rise in progesterone. But the issue here is that dropping level of estrogen. And as you move through the luteal phase, we see just that estrogen level dropping and dropping and dropping. And I certainly hear in clinical practice, lots of people talking about the premenstrual being different in terms of response to medication. So that is pretty much as much science as I want to share with you at this stage. If we need to come back to it, or there are things to be said, I'm happy to step in. But
that works
I
for
don't
me.
live in a female body, and I don't claim to be the expert.
There is some stuff I've heard
on that.
in that before about the relationship between estrogen and dopamine. I think what I didn't realise, perhaps I should have, given I've got a wife going through perimenopause, I didn't realise how long the period of low estrogen is. I mean, we're talking half the monthly cycle looking at that graph. Am I right on that? So
like that, Matt, but actually the experience, it is in the week leading up to menstruation. That's where it's worst. And I wondered whether, I can't find any literature about this, Sara may have, but I wondered whether it was that the levels are dropping, and that it's necessarily the absolute level, but the fact that it is dropping away. I'm not sure, but Sara's nodding, so potentially that's right. Because so otherwise you'd say, well, you'd only have that peak of focus around ovulation, so we'd have these really focused women for a couple of days a month. But actually, that's not. I
presume perfect sense to you, and that's your experience at the moment as well. Yes. Yeah. Sara, go for it. Yeah.
Makes sense. Yep, it makes sense, but it also, it's not, comes into a woman's life. So puberty, that's the first time you start them. So we may get a girl early, which we're getting better at doing within services, within ADHD assessment services. Diagnose them, start treatment, 9 years old. So puberty can start from the age 8.
Yeah.
Most periods start around 12 or 13. So the puberty will start at 8. So you have all these fluctuating hormones. But most people's periods, most people will have their first menstruation when they're around 12, 13. So you have this time period of lots and lots of different. Yeah. So that's something to bear in mind for parents who are watching this, who have young girls who have been diagnosed and treated, that sometimes medication can be a bit all over the place. Then you hopefully get into regular periods. So you're having a regular cycle, 28 days or so. If you've got no other difficulty, that comorbid, coexisting conditions, then you get older. You may want to go on the pill. You may want to go on an implant. It's going to have an impact on your hormones and on treatment because of the change in different levels. Some all is estrogen, some is combined estrogen and progesterone. it can get complicated. Then you come off birth control, you're in your 20s and you get pregnant. After pregnancy, hormones are all over the place and they can take up to 6 months to even, that's like years, to settle down. And again, impact. So you've got a diagnosis of ADHD.
Yeah.
You've had to stop treatment because this is a whole other episode, treatment in pregnancy. But most people will stop treatment. Then you have the 6 months of your hormones being all over the place whilst you're possibly breastfeeding or not breastfeeding and trying to get back into treatment. Understand who you are as a new mum, and this new family. Then you get into a cycle or you go back to birth control, and then you get to the perimenopause point of your life and the menopause. And menopause is defined by, it is officially menopausal, and you've had the menopause when it is 12 months after your last period. So you can be in that process a significant amount of time. And I don't know what it was like for Elaine. So you might have one period, and then you might not have another one. You might not menstruate again 8 months, and then you might have one. But that's still going to be another 12 months after that, because the way the medical model works, it's very fixed points. So this can go on in a woman's life. Well, it is a woman's
forever.
life. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's interesting you say that, Sarah, because I was on the depo injection from about my mid-20s till it all fell off and I left work in sort of like I was 49-ish.
Yeah.
I don't have any kids. So I literally went on to depo because my monthly cycle was so, my husband was running around like removing sharp objects from like the cutlery drawer and that sort of stuff. And because I hadn't had kids, I was like, oh, okay. And I had no clue where my cycle was, because it's like, when was your last cycle? Well, haven't had one for a really long time. So, me presenting, sort of 45-ish with this sort of, oh, it's depression, it's anxiety, try this, try that. It kind of continued because I didn't have a baseline to be able to give. And I laughed when you said, perimenopause is the bit before, and then the 12 months after your last period is when you're menopausal. I have no clue, because I was on depo. I came off it. I had a coil fitted. I'm on HRT. I haven't had a period in a really, really long time. So for me, I'm super confused. And I think, going back to Andrew's point about the dropping, where I started to notice that, 45-ish, and as you know, perimenopause isn't just a timeline that starts and finishes when, the NICE guidelines says it does. It can be any time in a woman's life, or there can be POI, polyovarian DD. So there's all of these things where perimenopause stroke menopause, surgical menopause comes into play. So it is complicated, isn't it? Super
really,
complicated.
really complicated. And it's not something that is very well researched or very well known. ADHD, and just as we were talking about girls not being picked up soon, women not having a sooner diagnosis, and lots of that is from the research originally was done on naughty boys that don't sit still. Now that sort of big part of the world community out, so you can have boys who don't sit still but aren't naughty, but with women, the diagnostic guidelines were based around this original research, and it misses lots. And there are biological differences in hormones. There are biological differences between male and female, social differences, which all impact on that assessment. And there are social differences that impact throughout your life. So as a female, the world will tell you that you should be organised, that you should be the nurturing mother that has everybody else organised, that you should know what's going on, you should have a great memory, you should be able to spin all these plates. Through an ADHD, and it's even trickier. Then sometimes you'll go, oh, well, it's depression. It's postnatal depression. Well, actually, how many women have gone with postnatal depression and it has been that drop and got the word discombobulation in my head. It's
Yeah, no, do you know, it's the one my wife used, Sara.
Yeah, but that if I wanted to draw a graph, it would be like this with hormones after birth. It's a really tricky time. And actually, are these evident postnatally? There's so much that we still don't understand and know. But what is evident in clinic for Andrew as well, for me, is that women are coming to their prescribers and saying, my medication is not as effective around the time of my period. The majority is just before. Some will be just tipping into it. It just depends. And we're taught about the signs and symptoms of you about to menstruate. So we'll talk about the spots, and we'll talk about the mood. So you may be looking for ice cream, chocolate. You may have a sort of pain in your lower back. Andrew's laughing because I'm like, go get Haagen-Dazs. But actually, there's other signs and symptoms, and it can be the ADHD presentation starts. And as a society, we're not very good at picking up on that. But there is research happening. Obviously, to prepare for this, I've gone and I've read loads, tried to update myself. And there's something that is literally just come out. I don't even think it's been from the Netherlands. So Sandra Coy and PsyQ in The Hague do lots and lots of work around female hormones. Susan Young in the UK has done lots of work, and there is a multi country and agency study called Project, which was at World Congress just earlier on, and that is about women with ADHD and the hormones, the impact, looking at what we need to understand, because it could make or break a titration if it's not working, or if you're asking people to reflect, they're having difficulties with hormones, or are we ruling out, oh, well, that doesn't work for that person, but actually it might have just needed some tweaking. It has a huge impact.
Absolutely. It's really interesting you say about the research, because I've seen the research that you're talking about, coming through, and it is all through, but it's like it's not coming quickly enough. And we've got this explosion of people like me. I'm 53 years old. I found out in April this year that I've lived with this all my life. And of course, in the 70s and 80s, it wasn't a thing, was it? Wasn't even a thing, was it? So, and it was like, oh, she'll be fine. She'll be all right. And she'll go to the factory and work. And so many people burning out. And, like when it comes to menopause stats, you've got 1 in 10 women leaving the workplace.
Mm-hmm. And
then on top, people like me who are then finding there's this whole other life that they could have had. My life was good, but some people may not have had, like you say, those economic factors, the holding down relationships, all of this sort of thing, and being like, and imagine finding that out at like 53 and being like, whoa. So there's another kind of mental health piece on top of that, isn't there, as well?
Yeah.
So and I'm from sitting in a place where the young ladies of puberty age going through this at my age, I want it sorting now. I want it to be sorted, and the more we do this, the more we get the data, the more it will be, and the less we target naughty boys.
Yeah.
So I have a question, if I can, very briefly. I was just, while you were both talking, I was listening, but I was looking at all the questions we had on our WhatsApp community when I said we're doing an episode on this. Now, I understand why, but predominantly the two words that come up more are perimenopause, menopause. How does it affect? What's the crossover? Estrogen, dopamine, everything that we've sort of touched on already. What's interesting to me is all of these ladies were once little girls. All of these little girls at some point, whether it was just pre-puberty, through puberty, and all the stages you mentioned earlier, Sara, must have, if I'm hearing things right, had struggles that they couldn't either describe, understand, or that their parents didn't understand. And so my wonder now, because you're talking about, for example, the goddess research, which is great, but I suppose my question in my head is, do we need the research to be starting from childhood if we can? Is there time? Is there a call for starting a longitudinal study on prepubescent girls with diagnosed or undiagnosed ADHD and tracking them through? And how does that change? Because I suppose eventually, and we could be talking tens of years, 15, 20, even more, but eventually that's where data starts to then we go, there's a pattern, there's recognition, there's things, classroom maybe strategies can change. I can remember being in school and the very emotional girls at 11, 12, 13, and the boys being typically boys and just but now I sit there going, I just wonder what the hell was going through their heads if they couldn't compute it and they were just being told, and I'm sure most women have heard this, and most of my clients who are female have been told this at least once, it's just your hormones.
Mm-hmm.
That's about as useful as a chocolate fire guard, thanks. How about what do you mean by it? What's your interpretation of that? But if that's the level of, I don't want to use the word care, but the level of information people are receiving, it does open a sort of a Pandora's box for problems, doesn't it, later in life?
Well, there's a flip side though as well, Matt, which is, I see your beautiful red curtain behind you. I do feel that from my acting skills for the last 53 years, I deserve because I have learned to, we don't do this, we do this. Well, what are they doing? I'm watching what other people are doing, and I've learned it so much that today I sit and I'm like, which one am I? Which person am I going to be? Because it has been so ingrained, and that is why, in the workplace, I'm sitting there going, I was a successful project manager running global projects. Why can't I organize a business case in my own business? What is happening? And it was because I didn't have the hyper focus on. I didn't have all of the coping mechanisms around me because I'd learned in the workplace to do all of these things. And this was how we presented to our parents, to our, lockdown came for me. And I was like, whoa, I'm ready for lockdown, because I just was not going out anymore because it was just too stressful, because I had to be this person that I didn't know it at the time, but it was so exhausting to be this person that was constantly all the time, having a 360 view, having a 360 here in a restaurant. It was exhausting.
Now, you see, that's the word that I see more people use all the time when they describe how does ADHD feel. It's exhausting. But I think you've hit the nail on the head there. My belief is we all learn that social construct of we behave like this, do this, don't do that. That's what good looks like. I always say this, and I think if you wanted people to know how hard that was for you, they would need to follow you home and watch you in the 3 or 4 hours after you get home from work or school or wherever and see how long it takes you to decompress. Right? Now, I say this a lot, but what's just occurred to me now is I wonder how much longer it takes when the estrogen is at its lowest, and that means you can't produce enough dopamine, and therefore you are that exhausted, and you aren't actually going to get back to baseline anywhere near as quickly. Is it any wonder then that so many women talk about having issues in relationships because their partner doesn't understand their ADHD? Well, hold on a minute. Is it that and I hold my own hand up here, is it that maybe we don't understand ADHD? We have no idea about hormones because, let's be honest, all young boys do in school when girls' hormones come up is sit there and snigger. And unless you happen to be a scientifically minded, nothing goes in, right? So we sit there, snigger, don't learn anything, and then get in a relationship and go, oh my God, do I need to buy chocolate? Do I need to get you a hot water bottle? What do I need? It's that, and I know I'm making light of it, but actually, this is genuine honesty now. I'm looking back going, perhaps if I'd had more understanding that what's going on, I may have known what to do a bit differently instead of just shutting down, or you're just being emotional, or God, dare I say it, you're a bit hormonal,
But
Yeah, right. Andrew's face, believe me. Listen, I know, but I know that's said, right? And it's that thing of, oh God, what did I just say? But we don't know this stuff, and you're right. I've before we recorded, I've been looking online, and I can pull lots of information-ish out about this, lots of hypotheses, lots of sort of generally speaking, but there isn't a lot of. So hopefully the goddess is to start it hard and fast and defined research that answers these questions. But it does lead me to ask this question. So Sara, I'm going to come to you first in terms of practice now. It makes sense to say every woman's experience of this is going to be unique, right? You experience your hormonal fluctuations in your way, you experience your ADHD in your way, and your other coexisting, whether it's autism or anxiety. Fine. So if they come to you, what does good look like in terms of the questions that you would like to ask, or what do you think needs to be asked of those ladies? Because we've spoken about how it could affect titration in the beginning.
Yeah.
But surely then there's also the conversation about, and by the way, once a month, your meds are going to stop feeling like they've worked. And here's some other things that might be worth considering then.
Yeah.
Would that be a good start in your mind?
Totally. That needs to be part of good practice in working with women with ADHD, and, doing an appointment a couple of days ago, it was yesterday before I was about this, was saying to a set of parents, you have a nearly 10-year-old daughter, this is the diagnosis. Whilst we're sorting out medication, this is what we need to sort out. I need you to be aware that in the next few years, we might get to a stable dose at the age of 10. Come 12, 13, when those periods start, anymore. So it's not just educating the clinicians into what needs to be asked. It's making sure at that point we're educating parents and the young person into what they need to be looking for. One of my bugbears is keep a diary. Who with ADHD is any good at keeping a diary? We lose it, we forget. But one of the things is that technology is awesome. So Fitbits. So I've got an app. Always forget to charge my Fitbit. Constantly forget to put it on. But the app is on my phone, and that tracks. And actually, that is quite helpful. So the days it and the day you finish, and that can be enough. So something as simple as that to then help guide a clinician through these ups and downs, and then starting to work within that session where you're reviewing medication about when has this helped, when hasn't this helped, looking for examples and trying to find those early warning indicators of actually it's going to be like this. So it's taken me a long time to understand, but for me, when my hormones are starting to drop, I get more anxious, and Andrew sees it before I see it. So Andrew notices that I'm starting to sort of have that hormonal shift long before I do. Eventually, I'll recognise it, but Andrew's the first person to see it because he sees sort of my anxiety levels starting to increase, or changing the way I do things, or my focus just not being enough. And on some occasions, you've said, meds today. Are your meds working? So it's that next step of partners as well. So as people go working with partners to explain what they may see, what partners can help with family members. And that has to be good practice. We have to start embedding that into those conversations as part of the assessment, and then as part of intervention in the treatment process, but also coming back to that, because there are going to be significant changes, like say after birth. And that's a huge one for me. When I look back at my career and I think of all sort of the perinatal teams and the antenatal teams, we've got midwives that are going out and doing home visits. We've got social work where, some new mums are really struggling and there's a referral to social services. Did they have ADHD? Have they had ADHD? All of these things, there are all these people around socially who could be starting to pick up these indicators. And that's really important. And it has to
Can I just say?
Yeah.
Sarah, you've just blown my mind there. Okay. Because I'm sitting here thinking about me as a menopausal woman, because I'm not quite sure I am. But obviously I take HRT, and you've just said about our youngsters going through puberty, get it fixed for a little while, and it might be steady for a while, and then it might change, and you've just suddenly just put on a massive big light bulb in my head, which is I titrated from April to now, everything is fine, but what happens when I have my next drop in estrogen and I need more HRT? So, oh my goodness, you just gave me another rabbit hole.
Yeah.
So it's never a finite thing with with the hormone as part of the whole situation. It just, wow.
And that then knocks, and we talk this, that then knocks into things like commissioning. We commission services to assess, diagnose, treat, get you stable. We'll see you in a year's time.
Yeah.
We encourage people to say, if things change, come back before your yearly review. Services aren't always commissioned for the work that's then needed. And we have these banging moments in people's lives. And again, like it says, these are the natural ones. There could be sort of chemical induced. There can be surgery. If somebody has coexisting conditions and needs a full hysterectomy with their ovaries removed and has ADHD.
Yeah.
And we know through the years, in the bad old days of mental health and psychiatry, we had women who were brought into the asylums, for the want of a better word, hysterical.
Yeah.
Hysterical after a hysterectomy. That's where it comes from. Women's bit, hysterectomy, hysterical. And again, just because there isn't the research doesn't mean that the evidence isn't there. We've always had this presentation dipping in and out of things. But like say, coming back to it, we should be recognising, but also as a person with ADHD, as an individual, be kind to yourself. If if you're lucky, you've got regular periods, what your fluctuations are like. Why are you going to put the most important meetings at work in for the week? And so that comes then that is then coming into coaching and access to work. And where am I going to need this support? It has an impact on everything.
Now you see, you've just preempted the next thing I was going to come on to there, which was, okay, I see and have seen an explosion in, which is great, menopause awareness in the workplace. It's fantastic. It's needed. In the same way that ADHD and neurodiversity awareness is needed. Great. But if that awareness piece doesn't have at least some touch point or understanding of coexisting, right? Because menopause on its own, perimenopause on its own, okay, is going to present in one way. It's going to be one thing. Perimenopause plus, and correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is that anxiety is not uncommon amongst women going through perimenopause. Stress, depression, right? Emotional dysregulation. Hold on a minute. Are they not mainstays of what we hear people talking about with their ADHD? And I'll bring you Andrew on his RSD, emotional dysregulation, anger issues, right? There's a point where we go, we need people to be aware that we might think this is my menopausal symptoms, but this might be ADHD, this might be anxiety. And Andrew and I have spoken about this in the past. It's a minefield for you ladies to experience it, because what do you treat is the wrong word, but what do you do first? You know, I'm sure that, again, there must be days where you sit there completely, I'll use your word there, so discombobulated, going, I haven't got a clue. I mean, I'm just all over the place, right?
Yeah.
And is that medication for ADHD? Is that, you know, you hormonal imbalance? What's going on? And more to the point, like Sarah just said, what do you do? Is that a point where we should be able to phone the workplace and say, not today? You know, that meeting, you know, that presentation, that's getting rescheduled, right?
Yeah.
Put it down to menopause. If you put it down to whatever, but that is not happening, because if I try, it will be like an absolute terrible experience for everyone. I would rather not. And is that part of the culture shift in organizations, that they should be able to go, I'm not even going to question it?
It's interesting because when you say about the workplace, Matt, even when you're in the workplace, so I decided to take my leave at a point where we were going through a transformation. So there was an opportunity for me to go, and I could have stayed, but I was like, you know, my self-awareness is quite high. So I was like, you know, I do not want to be managed out of this organization in this time, because I am pretty tired with all of this at the point, thinking, you know, perimenopause. But there's things like, going back to your question around on these days, what do we do? I stood with my boss, who is a very good friend still, and we were making a cup of tea, having a chat, as you do, and this is really important. So I'm not just telling you a story. This is really important because we stood, we chatted, we were making our cups of tea, and we're back and forward, and the fridge and everything. And I was like, oh, I need to go to the loo. And we were quite a small team, and you know, so we were quite informal with each other. And you know, she, okay, yeah, you don't need to like get a slip to go to the toilet. You know, you don't need to tell me you're going to the toilet. And at that point, what I was doing was stalling for time, because I had forgotten where the toilets were. And I had worked in that building for 15 years. Mm-hmm. Was frozen, absolutely frozen to the spot, going, why can't I remember where are the toilets? And I'm trying to visualize it. So there are those moments as well, and that's probably one of the extremes. But you know, Sarah, I'm sure you've lots of different things like this, but it scared the living daylights out of me, because I was like, what if I was driving my car? Mm-hmm. What if I was, you know, what you know, the whole what if situation happened. So, you know, in the workplace, yeah, right, what if I'd been stood up in front of, you know, a group of people giving a presentation that meant there was a contract at the end of it, and I completely had that moment. Yeah, it was, and that was I think that was a catalyst for me saying, I'm going to go and take some time out and work out what's going on here and do my thing. But you're right, it's not always accepted that, you know, ring in and be like, oh, you know, I need a mental health day, or I need a menopause day, or I need a, you know, some time to work at home. And some people aren't afforded it. I mean, Sarah, no. You couldn't do your job at home. Andrew, you couldn't do your job at home because you need to be with people. Whereas I was quite easily able to hide at home and work away. It feels like all of these things start meshing together, and it's about how we can make the workplace work for everyone, rather than pointing out different and you know, making it feel that, you know, if you do this for, you know, maybe Andrew might be like, oh, Sarah's had me up all night because she's been tossing and turning because she's too hot and driving me, and I can't concentrate today. He might be like, I would like to stay at home today, you know. So it makes it feel like it feels like it's a big ask, but why can't we just make it the norm for the workplace?
Yeah, I do completely agree. And, you know, as somebody that educates on neurodiversity awareness in the workplace, I always make a point, and I know it can only ever be a touch point, of saying, look, folks, you've got to consider, if you've got ladies in the workplace with ADHD, you've got to consider they have hormones as well, and it changes. And I do the most surface level, look, please, if you've had menopause workshops, if you're talking about it, if you've got an ERG specifically for menopause, please have a chat about this and understand it. But actually, you've just raised the question, and again, forgive me if you could see my eyes looking. I was reading the questions, and there's a term that comes up a lot, and I don't know if there's an answer to this, but you have both just illustrated what I've heard my wife, Catherine, refer to as brain fog, right?
Yeah.
These moments where forgetting where the toilets are, or I don't know how to get to my mother's or whatever. But I've also heard very similar presentations when people's ADHD is really gripping them.
Yeah. So which one was it I was having that day?
Right, exactly that. Oh my life! It's like, how are you supposed to know? What? I don't get. I mean, is it different from your point of view? Are you able to tell when it's brain fog, menopause, or just an ADHD day or an anxiety day, Sarah? Because you mentioned that, All right, actually, let me go back to that. I'm going to come to Andrew. What is it you notice then? Because Sarah said you pick up on the anxiety first, right? So there's a very clear change. What do you notice first that then?
Okay.
Sarah goes, oh right, okay.
So I'll answer that question, but I'll answer some thoughts that have been going through my head as what's been said has been said. And that the first point is it hormones? Is it ADHD? We've got to remember that ADHD is persistent and pervasive. Okay, so you don't have a bad ADHD. You have a bad ADHD day. You have a bad day, and your ADHD impacts more because of everything else around you. And this difficulty that's created by medical reductionism, we have medicine has to reduce things down to simple, sort of reduced silos of things. So the idea of an endocrinologist and a psychiatrist having a conversation is quite a rare. The relationship between psychiatry and endocrinology is really important. So to answer your questions about when it's a bad day, what kind of day is it? I think there's something. It's that other hormone again, is it? It's about adrenaline. If you are anxious because the place and your dopamine levels aren't as good as they are at other stages in the cycle, then you're going to be producing more adrenaline. You're going to and feeling anxious, and that is going to impact on everything. So the bad day isn't about the drop in dopamine level. It's about the impact of that on the rest of your endocrine system. So remember, I said at the beginning, we've got this balance of hormones. So if one changes, there are checks and balances. And I think that's what's going on. So to come back to the more personal question about what do I know? I don't know. I don't keep a sort of cycle tracker of my life. It's not like that. That's not how I roll. Maybe I should.
I want stalk a Fitbit. No, I'm joking.
Yeah, I was going to say share my Fitbit with you.
It's about, for me, someone and noticing that they're different and what's going on. And we talk a lot. I think, two people with ADHD having a relationship can be challenging, and communication is absolutely key. So we talk a lot. Yeah. And if I think it's the regulation to bring that horrible language in. If Sarah is struggling more or something's impacted her differently than it usually would, that's usually the first thing that ticks in my mind that goes, hang on a minute, is this related to estrogen? And it's not like I have that thought. I just think, so it's the way she usually would. And
yeah, no, that makes sense.
I think as a husband, Sarah said earlier, the first question I ask is, have you had meds today? And that's a reasonable question to ask. But when the answer is yes, that's not, well, they're not working. That's not a husband's response. A husband's response.
No.
Oh, right. Well, you seem more distracted. You seem like that what's just happened has really hit you hard. And it wouldn't a week ago have hit you like that. What's going on? And I think as partners, we can be supportive by asking those inquisitive questions. What's happening? You seem different.
Yeah.
Change. Is there anything I can do? Can I go and get that bar of chocolate that we talked about last week and have that impact on the mood, even though it's not biochemical?
Yeah. Oh, so don't tell her she's been a bit stroppy. Is that what we're
Probably
saying?
unwise, Matt. Yeah.
That wouldn't. Oh, okay.
I think one of the things is so not so much brain fog for me, but my words and my speech, isn't it?
Yeah.
So I will use words thinking I'm saying one thing and I come out with something else. So names. So I think I'm saying my mum's partner's name and actually I'm saying something totally different.
Yeah.
Is that you notice?
Yeah.
You go, you're right there. Yeah.
Oh.
So it's little things like that as well. Or just not being, I think for me as well, not being as effective in the chores I'm trying to achieve.
Yeah.
So it's taking us a bit longer, or I'm struggling to actually task where yes, I struggle with task completion anyway, but it presents differently.
So it's a slight sort of change in direction a bit. Here's the question then, because I think, Andrew, you just mentioned something about rarely do a psychiatrist and an endocrinologist speak. Right? Okay. But am I right in thinking there are other things that can present similarly as well? You know, we talk about thyroid issues and we talk about, heart issues. And so where's the relationship between, if the first port of call for most people will be their GP, right? I'm struggling with whatever. What happens there? Now, Sarah, I know you've got a sort of different perspective on this because of your sort of experience. So what was that like for you? And how did this come about that you thought maybe I've got to look in a different direction and pursue this from a different angle then?
So you mean around my ADHD and my diagnosis?
Yeah, and then you were talking just offline about the endocrinology and about thyroid issues.
So my diagnosis, and earlier on we were talking about masking, and you were talking about masking. Now bear in mind, so I was 39 when I was diagnosed, and I was working in an adult ADHD service, and I was masking so well that yes, I was struggling day to day with organisation and finishing things, but nobody was picking up. His colleagues. Andrew originally was my colleague, before things obviously changed. And Andrew said he wasn't sure I had ADHD until he met my kids. And that's where my diagnosis pathway started. My children were starting to be assessed, and I suddenly thought, this seems all a bit familiar, doesn't it? And it just penny stopped. And then that then led to a referral along that pathway. So mine was different. So I was like, say, I was working in an adult ADHD service, going into work, and there was definitely hints and tips. Making people way around work, being totally chaotic. That's what you do. What Sara does anyway. Yeah. But when it came to doing the stuff that I was hyper focused on, or when it came to working with the areas of where I knew my stuff, that whole hyper focus kicked in, and you wouldn't know. So on the back of that, I'd had a thyroid disorder since my early 20s, and it was diagnosed by my GP. And one of the things we were talking about was this year, for the first time, I went and saw a private endocrinologist because I couldn't get a referral to see an endocrinologist. It just wasn't happening with my GP. For years and years, people had said that you haven't been taking your thyroxine. Long story short, turns out I don't. When I have thyroxine in my system, I don't convert it to the hormone. I'm rubbish at that. So that was a bonus. But what was there and what was obvious in terms of that endocrinology was the difficulties and the challenges that I'd had predated my thyroid starting to fail. So it was there from when I was younger. But I clearly diagnosed ADHD. And I was me. I was Sara, and I had the family environment where I had scaffolding. I had very, very young parents who tried really hard. They were awesome. I had cousins. I had a brother, and I was just me, and that worked. And one of the things that they brought up in was my mum taught me to read before I went to school, and that helped me to mask. So by the time I went to reception, I could read books. And that helped me to mask a lot. But when you were talking earlier on about the girls in school crying, I remember being in year 7, in senior, and it was sort of like an end of term test. And there were all these different stations in the science lab. I'd been staring out the window. So when I then came to having to follow the instructions, I didn't listen to them. And I just cried. Yeah, I cried. And I remember the science teacher. I still remember Mrs. Hales going, crying. Why are you so upset? Because I didn't have a clue. Didn't have a clue. And I was petrified I was going to be told off for not listening.
Mm-hmm.
So I didn't want to say to her, I wasn't listening to you. I was staring out the window. So I just cried. And again, wasn't picked up on, but it was the 90s. So this was 1990.
Mm-hmm.
So this was sort of 19. And it just wasn't a thing. But because I could read and because I was clever, for the want of a better word, I was just winging it and masking it. And it wasn't until, looking back, I hit my A levels. And the A levels was, I totally tanked them. All A's, other than 1 A in general studies. But studies with ADHD, you're going to get an A because you don't show up. And, it was there. But that was my story. So coming back, it's about when all of these other endocrinology difficulties are there. So as ADHD nurses ask these questions, it's part of looking at the diagnostic criteria. So looking at, is there any sort of difficulties with diabetes? Because we know when blood sugars are low, you can't concentrate. So now that doesn't mean you can't have diabetes and be ADHD.
No.
Yeah. But we just have to look at where these difficulties are happening. If your blood sugars are having those difficulties with concentration, it's evidencing it. And that's what an ADHD assessment is. You're basically evidencing what it's not, more than what it is. We know the symptoms are there, so let's make sure it's nothing else. And that is why ADHD assessments are so, tell us if you think I'm wrong, but that's sort of what we do. We're ruling out and showing what it is. We know people with ADHD will have periods of depression. Depression impacts on your mood. It impacts on your cognition. It impacts on your memory. Same with anxiety. There are all these different states, but it's that longevity because the symptoms will be there when they are there when somebody is younger. It's looking and it's getting the evidence. Now, that doesn't mean if you can't remember your childhood, you can't have a diagnosis. There are so many different ways of getting that evidence and showing that it's there.
Can I ask a question then to you and Andrew in terms of assessments? We touched on this before about if this podcast and these episodes do anything, if they arm people with different and maybe more useful information to have conversations with professionals like yourselves with, this is a good thing. Now, what's just occurred to me is I have conversations all the time about self-assessment, self-diagnosis. Is it valid? Fine. Okay. I understand during COVID, lots of people, thousands of us sat there going, oh, that's why. Because, we could. However, would you prefer, as professionals, that somebody came almost armed with information to an initial assessment with you and said, look, I've been looking into my childhood, my hormones, and sort of had, listened to an episode like this, started to put the pieces together, done their research for themselves and said, I don't know whether this will help, but here, have this. Would that help you in your role, would you say, in terms of that initial stage? Or would it be a case of, look, that's great, but I'm still going to go through as we have to go through the process?
I think it depends on the clinician. Because it's, you can say, no, I think we'll just go through the process that I do with everybody, but how responsible individual need, if someone's gone to the trouble of pulling this evidence together and saying, well, actually, there are issues with my menstrual cycle, I have issues with my my thyroid monitoring, having all that information in a bundle and saying, here is absolutely wonderful. This is the ones that I like the most because often there are. I had a conversation with a young lady yesterday where there were little clues from allergy sensitivities and all sorts of things that I've got to go away and look at what's going on there. But there are clues in the endocrinology. areas of medicine that a clinician should be considering, because we are not ADHD. We are people who live with ADHD, and we don't sit in these different specialisms. It's hard that ADHD sits as a specialism away from general psychiatry. That really difficult when 1 in 5 people sitting in a general psychiatrist's office probably has ADHD, according to the research. They're sitting there saying, "Oh, it can't be ADHD, but you're not responding to this antidepressant, so we'll try a different antidepressant." And they work through the 20 plus antidepressants that are there when actually it's ADHD. Specialism has function, it has use in medicine, because it allows us to be blinkered and focused. But actually, sometimes we have to take a step back and think about this bigger picture. What's going on with the thyroid? The thyroid bloods are coming back all right, but we're still seeing symptoms that maybe, and it's always got to be, as a clinician, I always keep that sort of stuff in mind, particularly in terms of endocrinology and general psychiatry. You can't just ignore those and aim for laser precision focus from a stimulant. That's not going to work. This is about helping people
we said that before, haven't we?
Best that they can within the biology that they're limited by.
So interestingly then, sorry, Elaine, I was going to say that comes back to what you said about you having that aha moment when Sara was talking earlier and going, oh, wait a minute, I'm just coming to the end of titration. But what happens when I have another hormonal change? What happens when? And had you been given that as a heads up in diagnosis, would your thought process have changed, or would you have gone, oh, well, now I'm going to pay attention? Or
so my story is, I went with all of the information in 2015 about, I was very fortunate to have private healthcare, so I was able to see a private psychiatrist, and I went to see the psychiatrist, and we tried, the CBT. I don't quite know what this is meant to be, kind of thing, all right, let's move on. I don't want to be medicated. Well, I think we should try that. So we tried all of the different medications. And then we had a point where I was in a bit of a, okay, I'm okay, but I'm not brilliant, but I'm okay. And that was when I, got fixated on, oh, hang on, how old am I? Oh, okay. Started looking at menopause. I was the one that rocked up to my GP down the road here with the nice clinical guidelines for menopause, with clinical papers on menopause. The fact that, I researched this research, as it happens, it was received well because, of course, I'd researched testosterone, I mean, tell me you're living with ADHD and you don't know it. Good Lord. But, that landed okay there. And obviously dealing with a private psychiatrist, I was able to go back and say, hey, what about all of this? Oh my goodness. And of course, being a psychiatrist, as you say, Andrew, they sent me back to my GP because it was menopause, that it wasn't their place. And Sarah, you're saying about all of these different tests. I was tested for rheumatoid arthritis. I was tested for this. I mean, the amount of money and time that has been wasted. It is this. It is this. I know my body. It is this. And all of a sudden, it's like, oh yeah, it is that. And it's like, yeah, but you've just put me through a whole process that someone else could have had. So that continued, and then obviously leaving the workplace. Of course I did an online assessment, didn't I? And I took it back to the psychiatrist that knew my history. And I was like, hey, things are not looking good. What do you think of this? Ooh, right. Yes. And here we are.
Right, hold on. So when you went back to that psychiatrist with that online assessment and said things aren't looking good, what did you at that point mean? And what were you trying to... what was their response to what wasn't the good bit, or what should have improved?
So I'd been on antidepressants,
right,
for a number of years. We'd been up and down. We'd increase, we'd decrease, we'd increase, we'd decrease. So we'd been all the way around antidepressant, circle. I had HRT. It was on the go. We checked all my hormone levels because I went privately to have my HRT sorted out because I couldn't be seen. And I've all the beautiful gifts that menopause brought me. I felt like I was ticking everybody. 30 odd. So I knew that all of my hormone levels were fine. So I was like, yeah, something else is at play here. And when I sort of went back and, I had taken in the online test, and I was like, and then we started looking back at my records. And I was like, well, we thought it was my hormones. It's not that now. We thought it was, so it was almost like building that picture, like you say, Andrew, when someone lands with a picture that they can give you. But we still went down a very robust route. It wasn't just taken as fact. Because I had my own agency, I was able to just keep pushing, but obviously not everyone is as bullshit as me and is fixated with me. So not everyone has that agency, and not everyone has the privilege of being able to go to see a private, healthcare provider. Now, latter this year, I've literally been paying out of my pocket because I don't have private healthcare, because I don't work for a big organisation anymore. But it was still worth it for the simple reason that I could have gone onto the list and waited another few years to be seen on Right to Choose, but that psychiatrist had no 15 and had taken me on that journey, had been on that journey with me, and always extremely respectful for me bringing those things into the clinic with them. So almost unpicking before we even started where fine. And I'm not a psychiatrist, I'm not a healthcare professional, but what I was doing was trying to do, as Andrew said, bring something that sort of says, look, this is what's going on. Like you say, Sarah, keeping your diary of things that are going on, a bit of data, but going back to, the endocrinology, Andrew, I have argued that the bell-shaped curve and the norms are the norms, but my norms are different to Matt's norms and Sarah's norms and your norms. So sometimes we just have to push to say, but my body is very different to, and I may need, but my levels are saying they're in the norms. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it really does. And but that's why I was interested in, again, it's that journey, isn't it? And that process of discovery. You used the word that I think is very important, is this feeling of agency, this feeling of ability to speak for yourself and to be confident in what you say. And I'll come back to that again. The whole reason I wanted to do our podcast, but I would only do it with these two in front of me, was because they have the knowledge and the ability to help lift me up and give other people agency. If I did it on my own, I'm just another bloke waffling on about what I think I know about ADHD. These guys, it's your profession, right? And I'm really grateful for that. And in getting you on then as well, this experience, this, hopefully, every lady, every woman, every girl that gets to hear this will, if they feel nothing other than, it's not just me. If they feel nothing other than, okay, maybe I can ask a few questions. I can look at this in a slightly different way and not be afraid to question. Then I think we're doing well. I will just say this, Andrew and Sarah, I won't say the source. There are a couple of tests that I've seen and I've shared with other women before, which seem to be more specified like online. Have I got things? One for ladies, and I've just seen one for girls as well. Right, so this is for I think under 14, and I've just scanned the questions, and literally all of them, as I read them, are based more on emotion and feeling than anything else. I mean, I'm scanning them. I get stomach aches or headaches. My feelings change. I feel like I want to cry. I feel left out. I have arguments with friends. When I want to join a group of girls, I don't know how to or what to say. Even when I've got something to say, I don't put my hand up. I get upset or angry more than others do, I feel. But these are all feelings. But I wonder if that's been written because actually that, I don't want to use the word plays into, but that's actually focusing more on, there are hormones at play at a young age that do affect your emotional response to things. And it's trying to draw the parallel between, okay, is that, as Andrew said, is that pervasive? Is it constant or is it fluctuating? And then is that a starting point for mom and dad to go to a GP and say, hold on a minute. Does that make sense? Because I've not seen that before, you know, all the standard metrics, and Sara, you mentioned at the start, all of the standard DSM stuff for years was boys. I'm astounded that any female was ever diagnosed, if I'm honest, based on what was available for you as professionals. I'm astonished because it didn't relate to most women. So it's sadly no surprise that so many women end up being late diagnosed, to me. And it's sadly no surprise that so many women are so confused by it in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if I go back to the list of questions I've got in front of me from our community, all of them were, I've never had this explained. I don't understand why. Can you explain why? Relationships between estrogen and progesterone, relationships between menopause and menopause, relationships between hormones dropping. And wait a minute, we're back to this point of if the information was there in the first place. And all right, there might not be the body of research, but there are billions of women who've experienced this. And it's about being able to say, you have voices, you're allowed to say, hold on, this is what I experience every month and have done since I was potentially 8 years old. Could you please pay attention to that as well?
Yeah. It's interesting, Matt, because I'm thinking about when I said about agency, you know, I was able to have that agency for myself. But Sara, when you're talking about, you know, young girls, you know, their agency comes from their parents. And if their parents aren't on board for their agency, it's like, you know, well, can the teacher be there for agency? You know, who agency that, okay, well, we're fixed now. Oh, no, we're not fixed. Who notices? So it's yeah, it's almost like, how can we educate everybody, you know, not just old ladies like me.
Well, but when you mentioned there about teachers being an agency for young girls, to refer boys to sort of school mental health services than they are girls, or ADHD. That's there in the statistics and the research that's being gathered.
Is that because you've got a hyperactive naughty boy, so they make the link quicker? Oh, I think that looks like ADHD. So therefore, and I know this is an impossible statement, and to all my friends who are teachers, please don't come round and throttle me. But therefore, surely that says there's a bit in the education of teachers. You know, there's an argument for whether it's teacher training days or in teacher training itself, just that bit to say, look, this is what ADHD, this is what neurodiversity looks like in girls. It might not be what you thought it was.
Mm-hmm.
Go back to you crying because you hadn't paid attention before the exam, Sara. Yeah. If that teacher, instead of going, what's the matter, had gone, that's an unusual response to, can you start the exam now, and took you to one side, maybe, you know, in the 90s you'd have known something sooner than you do now. It's a phenomenal place for us to be, isn't it? I mean, what I'm really conscious of here is,
just to bump in, one of the tools we use for diagnosis is the DIVA, the diagnostic interview for ADHD. There's the young DIVA and the adult DIVA. And literally in the last couple of weeks, they were advertising for a PhD candidate to start the process of looking at the DIVA and how they can be sensitive to women. So that is starting, but just now that's starting. So people are talking about it, but they're looking at that sensitivity right now. And that will hopefully then inform all those bits of training and education. And it is tricky for teachers. They have so many things they have to do in classes that are just overwhelmed. And it isn't, you know, it wasn't in training, but then me and Andrew, when we trained many moons ago, 20 odd years ago since I've trained, ADHD and neurodevelopmental was not in mental health nurse training. No. Didn't exist. And I will hold my hands up. Even when I went for a job in the adult ADHD service, I'd done some courses, I'd done some training, but I had to hold my hands up and go, you are going to have to train me, because I can tell you what psychosis is, I can tell you what depression is, I can tell you what personality, bipolar, blah, blah, blah. I can take a guess, but you're going to have to. And they did. 15. I got that job got the job in 2014. Actually, it was about Christmas time 2014. I went for the interview and I started in the March in the 2015. And I sat there and went, I don't know enough. And that's what, 10 years ago. And it's just slowly now, and there are lecturers at local universities who have a neurodevelopmental diagnosis, and it's becoming more, but it's still, we're just not even touching the surface.
Right, okay, there's an interesting point there, Sarah, you mate. Andrew, I'll bring you in on this one then. In your professional experience then, and you saying that has just blown my mind, 2015 and how little was known. Is this, I'll use that word agency again, I think at this point, is this again a time, a space where the more people share their experiences, the more people talk about their unique experiences of their ADHD and how it has affected them, the more that it helps inform the research, the more that it helps move things forwards quicker than perhaps it has in the last 9 years or since you've been working in this area, Andrew, because I've often got the impression that the research, or not the research, but the methodology behind assessment and diagnosis has been fairly static. Right? It's that until the DSM's updated, that's all we say, but that's it. And it's still based on the information that was there when that information was first written and when those guidelines were first written. And so what is it that speeds that up, I suppose, or improves that process from your point of view?
There's as always with your questions, Matt, there's layers to that. And I've been doing this long enough to remember the previous version of DSM, which had a lower age for symptom onset as a criteria. So you had to have symptoms evident before the age of 7. So the most recent revision brought that up to the age of 12, because if you've got someone in their 70s in your clinic, they haven't got someone who can remember. It's medical reductionism yet again. We need the diagnostic criteria to be simple, straightforward, and focused in on key measures. So we were talking last week, I think, about the debate as to emotional dysregulation as being part of the diagnosis of the condition that we all live with, but it can't sit in the diagnosis because it doesn't differentiate ADHD from the other diagnoses that have emotional dysregulation in them. So it's not just about the diagnostic process, it's not just about the assessment, it's about clinical practice and that's bigger than the diagnosis of ADHD. That's about the doing of medicine, the doing of nursing, and how we provide care and what we think about people. I think Elaine was talking about sort of standardizing accommodations. That actually everybody should have these accommodations. It should. You've got ADHD, you need this. It should be. That's what you need to optimize your performance in this role. Yeah. Whether you've got a wooden leg or you're inattentive or whatever it is, it doesn't matter. It's about how we as society respond to that. So it's bigger than assessment process, because diagnostics and assessment processes need to be targeted in order to be effective. But it's conversations like ours where we're attempting to broaden out that understanding and relate this wider human experience of living with ADHD as opposed to being diagnosed with ADHD that helps push things forward and raise these sorts of questions.
Yeah.
Because I was just thinking when you asked the question, Matt, and going back to, Sarah, when you in 2015, when you got the role that you were going into, it wasn't a thing at that point in time, or it was, but it's way. In 2015, I was the one, going with the nice guidelines for menopause, going in with the clinical papers. So if you think about, you're looking at two streams here from where I've been on my journey. One was menopause is being talked about more. We know more about menopause. We know more about, we know more about menopause with ADHD for people of my age. We know more about hormones for young girls as well. There's just been a point where I think, I don't want to sound like, a radical feminist, but I feel like, we have been kind of left behind a little bit, and that we are starting, be heard, because, I caught COVID 2 years after COVID hit, standing, shouting my mouth off down at Parliament Square on World Menopause Day. I managed to miss it, but I felt the need to be there and to make that. Andrew, coming back to clinical practice, it is all starting to move in the right direction. But how can we make it move for everyone in the right direction, if that makes sense?
Keep that momentum going, not letting
Absolutely.
it sort of drift off.
Yeah,
absolutely.
well, that's absolutely the only way forward, isn't it? And it's interesting. I was just reflecting there. The term you hear a lot is misdiagnosis or women who've been overlooked. What I'm getting from this conversation is the level of complexity in as an individual. Now, I'm not talking from a clinician looking at you. Individually, the level of complexity that you as ladies have to become experts in for yourself, if you're able to understand everything that might be going on, right, in itself is huge. If you then, use you, Elaine, as an example, get to 53 years old thinking, right, I've got it now, this is this, and it's that, and that's been the issue for that, and that's why, and then somebody goes, oh, by the way, there's a four letters you might want to consider, it's ADHD as well. I mean, it's no wonder we see so many people, so many women in states of depression or states of high anxiety or states of just despair when they've been diagnosed. And it's something I hear a lot. I've heard a lot from my own clients in mentoring and in the past as well. And Andrew and I touched on it before of, I don't know, there's this expectation of, great, I've got a diagnosis, life will get better. Now it's like, woo, magic bullet. And actually for a lot of people, it's oh, wait a minute, now I just have new information that's going to make me cross and angry and resentful and upset, and how dare people have missed that, and why didn't anyone know? And it's an astonishing situation to be in.
The conversation I always have when I do because giving somebody a diagnosis and not giving somebody a diagnosis is really hard, really hard. Nobody comes to you wanting the ADHD diagnosis because their life's perfect. You seek an ADHD diagnosis because you're having difficulty. I always explain, whatever is going on, whatever the label we're going to put on this is, you're still having difficulties and you still need help. You are still struggling, and that has to be really important for people. But when I do give a diagnosis of whatever combined type inattentive, I always say, few days, weeks, months, you are going to go through this massive grief process. You are going to go through the bargaining, the denial, the laughing, what I did, I just laughed when I got my diagnosis. I just started giggling. You go through that whole lot, and it's how we support you. And sometimes you don't want to have a conversation about medication at that point. Actually, what you want to do is you want to go away and you want to go, what the hell just happened to us? What's this all about? Is everything that I've had in my life real? Are the conversations I've had, the jobs I've been sacked from, that wasn't me being lazy? You just need that. And again, that's a really important process for all people who are involved with people who love someone with ADHD, who care for somebody with ADHD, is in those first few weeks to months, giving that support. But also, where it's really interesting because we're all at different diagnostic sort of after points. So I'm 6-7 years after my diagnosis. Andrew's a couple of years, you're a year and a bit. And your whole thought process changes as you go through years. So I remember when Andrew started med school, why don't you take these every day? They're awesome. And now you're at that point, aren't you, where you pick and choose it? Because it's first, it's like, oh my God, how should I have to realise because you lose some of you with medication as well as getting. So it's that balance, but it's not, for me, and in my clinical practice, it's making sure that you come back to that sort of conversation about how are you at this point now? You've been diagnosed for 5 years. Now, where are you? Where are those challenges? What are we doing? I only got access to work last year for sort of the software. This year, I've managed to get a PA, but it's taken me years and years to actually come to the sort of recognition. I've got a disability.
Yeah, hard, isn't it?
I'd say that's a really big thing. I'd say that as a nurse.
And the grief.
Yeah.
Huge.
Yeah. Could my life have been different?
The grief thing, Sarah, is huge, isn't it? Because, I had the grief around menopause because I was a completely different person. I wasn't able to do all the things that I used to be able to do. Then, like Matt said, they threw this full at me. And the shortage of medication from like September to now, I have again been in this angry state of, I wish I had never known that April had happened and I started titrating onto medication because I'm finding this really hard because I thought I was on it, Matt, you know?
Yeah,
Like, you just...
I know, but that's the issue, isn't it? That's the problem. Yeah.
And you don't know what you don't know till you've tried it.
Right. So listen, I'm very conscious of time here, right? I know that both Sara and Andrew are clinicians and you're working and I'm pulling you out your day. So I will just say this before I bring Andrew in to sort of sum up with a bit of clinical stuff. I said this at the start, I'll say it again now. This is just the first time I think we're going to touch about this. I've been listening and I've got about 10 separate episodes in my head that we could spend a separate hour on at least that have come out of just this conversation, right? So we will be revisiting this, but I hope, if nothing else, it's highlighted that, yes, we're speaking about this, and the more we speak, the better the information gets. So we will revisit. But Andrew, having gone through all this, heard all of this from Elaine and from Sara, from their perspective, is there anything that you want to tie this together with in that clinical sense, that practice sense, that you think is important before we close?
Absolutely, there is. And before I do that, I'd like to say, as we've been recording this, I've just been notified of a new study that's coming out. It's the Scandinavians have done it again. So there's a new study that Susan looking at the Scandinavian population, and they've evidenced that women are diagnosed approximately 4 years later than men. And that's across population studies. So the sample size there was 85,000 people. They've shown that of those 85,000 people, typically women, so they factor in all of the different variables. Typically women live 4 years longer before getting diagnosed than men. So, there are gender differences. We know that twice as many boys as girls get diagnosed, but is bringing in, hard facts from a population in Stockholm that there are gender differences that must be dealt with. As much as there are, 83% of people looking at our website are women. So there are gender differences of looking for service, but also how services are delivered and how people are accessing them that we really need to be thinking differently about. But beyond that, yes, there are some key messages that I need to give people to take away from this, and I'd like to take you on a journey through the lifespan of a woman, really, and drop in these key messages. So the first thing to keep in mind is puberty. If you've got a young child with ADHD, there is an onset of puberty. We are going to see variations in the impacts of medication on girls. So it's important as parents of girls to be advocating for that in clinics, in CAMS and the like. There's the issue of contraception and how can that be used, I think that's a discussion to be had with GPs, thinking about what product choice you use, because if it has an estrogen content, then it's going to have an impact on dopamine levels. So that's an important thing to bear in mind. For people who are titrating onto medication, important that the person titrating you gives consideration to your cycle, because if a dose is increased when the estrogen levels are low, when those estrogen levels come back up, you could be overtreated, and that could lead to all sorts of problems. So ideally, clinicians should be asking about before increasing dose, and I think increasingly, but back when I started in ADHD, we were a lot slower in titration. Practice has moved on, and yes, we can titrate quickly. We can increase dose week on week. But if we're doing that with women, then we need to be saying, if it's not working, increase the dose. Where were you in your cycle? That's a really important thing. Next issue is about pregnancy and breastfeeding. So you're going to hit all sorts of different opinions on pregnancy and breastfeeding and prescribing ADHD treatments. Prescribing pregnancy is challenging because it's unethical to do the studies that evidence whether it's safe or not. But there are studies coming that are showing that women can be treated in pregnancy. Yes, there are risks, but there are risks of not treating in pregnancy as well. So a blanket, we must not prescribe in. I think we're moving beyond that we are starting to see evidence of support for that, and there are different factors to consider, but it's an important one, and that leads me to perinatal psychiatry. If you are pregnant or you've had your child and you're seeing hormone fluctuations, perinatal psychiatrists are the psychiatrists most likely to give consideration to these hormone fluctuations. So don't just go thinking a psychiatrist is the right way to go. You may need someone with expertise in perinatal psychiatry to be advising on that. With breastfeeding, yes, there is transmission of the medications we prescribe in breast milk often, but that doesn't necessarily mean they can't be prescribed. There are considerations to be had. So don't be told, oh, I can't prescribe anything because you're breastfeeding. I can't prescribe anything for because you're pregnant. It's a balance of risks decision. And there's more to it than just, no, we don't do that. And my practice has evolved to be more accommodating of that lately because the evidence is, the literature is literally dropping in our inboxes as we've spoken today. So that's really important to bear in mind. As always, the most important thing is be kind to yourself. If you're having a bad day, you're having a bad day. It's not about whether it's ADHD or estrogen levels or, the chimney's just fallen off the roof. Bad days are bad days, and we must be kind to ourselves. We've got limits. Everybody always wants more than we can give. That's the nature of modern society. We live in a fast-paced world where there are all these expectations, and man or woman, it's about being kind to yourself and being honest about what you can do.
Yeah, I'll take that. Thank you, Andrew. That's really important stuff. Right, ladies, I'm going to bring you both in. So I'm going to give you sort of 30 seconds to summarise. All right, maybe a bit more. What's your message to every other, hopefully, lady, girl, woman that listens to this? After this conversation today, what would you like to add to that from Andrew? What would you like to say that you think is the most important stuff? So, Elaine, I'll come to you first.
Most important thing for me is that you're not alone, and things are changing. We're uncovering all this. You just heard from Andrew that literally stuff's just dropped in his mailbox there. Whichever part of your life you're in, just don't take no for an answer. Ask again, but just keep doing what you're doing and speak to people about it. Don't just sit there and think, oh, sounds a bit weird, I'm not going to ask this question because it feels a bit awkward. Just get over the awkwards and go for it.
Fabulous. Take that. Sara?
It's about people taking away the message that it is okay to contact their titration nurse, their psychiatrist to say, I think it is this. I think that this is impacting on us, or these meds aren't working. Don't wait the year. Pick up the phone and get in touch. Can. And coming back to your point, if people want to turn up with loads of information at the assessment, brilliant, because I love that. I don't know about Andrew, but I love it when somebody turns up and there's school reports and there's letters from family members, from husbands. It's brilliant. More evidence you've got. Maybe that we'll still have to do the other bits, but I love that. It's brilliant. Helps with conversation. So you can say, oh, I can see in year 10 you told the teacher to stick it where the sun don't shine. And open that conversation, things like that. It's brilliant. So yeah, if you've got stuff, even if you think it's not relevant, because that's one thing people say to us all the time, my school reports are fine. Bring them. Better not. Find the words in them.
I see you laughing, Andrew. Yeah. Yeah. Aren't they all the same? All right. Well, listen, to the three of you, thank you so much for giving up your time, for bringing your knowledge and your experiences to the podcast. It's been fascinating for me. I hope it's as fascinating for everyone else listening. And I will say the same thing I always do. Wherever you are listening to this, wherever you are watching this, please like, subscribe, download. The more you do that, the more you leave comments, the more this podcast grows. And just to remind you, this is free now. It's always going to be free. You will never see an advert. You'll never hear an advert. And the reason for that is Andrew and I have always said nothing should get in the way of the information. Okay? So please, please support us, because that means an awful lot when you do. Please comment, and hopefully we will see you again next Thursday for another episode. But until now, this has been the first, I think, of many episodes of Talk ADHD, talking about women and what can we do. So thank you all very, very much. Have the rest of a lovely day, and to everyone else, we'll see you in a week or so. Take care, folks.